A shocking story is now making waves among royal watchers around the world. According to a series of unverified reports and online claims, tensions inside the British royal family may have reached a level that few people could have imagined. The story centers around King Charles and Queen Camilla. The allegations claim that behind the closed doors of the palace, their relationship may have been far more complicated than the public has ever been told. But the most surprising name connected to this story is not King Charles. It is Prince William. According to these claims, William may have stepped in after allegedly becoming deeply concerned about what was happening behind palace doors. Now, before we go any further, it is important to make one thing clear. There is currently no official confirmation from Buckingham Palace supporting these allegations, and several of the details circulating online have not been independently verified. But that has not stopped the story from spreading rapidly. So, where did this extraordinary story supposedly begin? According to the claims, everything started on the morning of May 3, 2025, during a private planning meeting at Clarence House. King Charles, Queen Camilla, and several senior royal advisors were allegedly present. At first, the meeting was said to be completely normal. Documents were on the table. Officials were discussing schedules and upcoming royal engagements. It was the kind of routine meeting that happens behind the scenes every day inside the monarchy. But then, according to the allegations, something suddenly changed. The reports claim that Queen Camilla allegedly became extremely angry with King Charles in front of the people sitting around the table. The accusations circulating online claim that she confronted Charles and allegedly used deeply personal and humiliating words against him. Some reports even claim that she accused the king of being weak, of always taking Prince William's side, and of lacking the strength to stand up for himself. Now, if such an incident actually happened in front of senior palace staff, it would be far more serious than an ordinary argument between a married couple. It would mean that a private disagreement had allegedly unfolded in front of people whose job is to protect the reputation and stability of the monarchy. And according to the story, the room reportedly fell completely silent. No one knew what to say. Some staff members allegedly looked away. Others reportedly focused on their paperwork, pretending to continue working while the confrontation was happening in front of them. And then came the detail that has attracted the most attention. According to the unverified claims, King Charles allegedly said almost nothing. He reportedly remained silent as the confrontation continued. When the meeting eventually ended, Camilla allegedly left the room first. Charles, however, was reportedly left sitting in his chair. And according to the story, several people in the room were deeply disturbed by what they had just witnessed. But this is where the story takes an even more dramatic turn, because one person allegedly decided that what had happened could not simply be ignored. Instead of sending a routine report through the normal palace chain of command, the person allegedly went directly to Prince William. And according to the claims, William did not receive a simple complaint. He allegedly received a detailed file. A file that supposedly contained statements from multiple witnesses, a timeline of the alleged incident, and information that staff members believed could support their concerns. If this claim were true, it would represent an extraordinary decision. Someone inside the royal household would have effectively decided to bypass the usual system and take the matter directly to the future king. And that raises one very important question. Why? Why would someone risk going directly to Prince William? Was it simply because they were concerned about King Charles? Or did they believe that something much bigger had been happening behind palace doors for years? According to the story, William allegedly received the file at his private office and began reading through the material. The claims suggest that the more he read, the more concerned he became. But allegedly, it wasn't just the incident involving his father that caught his attention. The file supposedly contained claims about other incidents involving Camilla and palace staff. And suddenly, what appeared to be one isolated confrontation was allegedly beginning to look like something much bigger. The reports claim that William started asking questions. He allegedly began speaking privately with senior staff members. He reportedly wanted to know what had happened, who had witnessed it, and whether similar incidents had taken place before. And according to the allegations, this was the moment when the entire situation inside the palace began to change. Because if the claims were true, Prince William was no longer looking at the situation as a family disagreement. He was allegedly looking at it as a potential threat to his father, and possibly even to the stability of the monarchy itself. But then came the biggest question of all. What exactly did Prince William discover when he started looking deeper into the allegations? Because according to the story, within just a matter of days, more people allegedly began coming forward, and what they reportedly had to say could completely change the way this entire story is understood. That's where the story gets even more explosive. The story did not end with the first report. According to the unverified claims circulating online, what happened next was even more significant. After Prince William allegedly received the confidential file, several other people within the royal household supposedly began coming forward. And according to these reports, they were not all telling the same story. They were allegedly describing a pattern that, if true, had supposedly been developing for years. The claims suggest that staff members from different royal residences and departments began sharing their own experiences. Some allegedly described Queen Camilla as extremely demanding. Others claimed that she could become angry when things did not go according to her expectations. And some even alleged that she had tried to influence decisions involving other members of the royal family. But it is important to repeat that these are unverified allegations. There has been no official confirmation that these events actually happened. Still, the story claims that William was becoming increasingly concerned. According to the reports, the people who had remained silent for years suddenly felt that they could finally speak. Why? Because, allegedly, they believed someone was finally willing to listen. One of the most serious claims involved the relationship between Camilla and the younger generation of the royal family. According to the allegations, there were moments when tensions supposedly increased whenever William and Catherine received significant public attention. Some reports claim that certain staff members believed Camilla was uncomfortable with the growing popularity of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Again, there is no verified evidence publicly establishing that this was the case, but the allegations continued to spread, and then came another supposed revelation. According to the story, one former member of the royal household allegedly described a situation in which Camilla became angry during an internal discussion. The claim suggests that she allegedly wanted everyone to remember her position within the monarchy. If true, such an incident would raise questions about the balance of influence inside the royal family, because there is an important difference between official power and personal influence. A person may not have direct constitutional authority, but they can still have enormous influence through relationships, access, and proximity to the monarch. And that is exactly what made these allegations so controversial. According to the claims, William began to realize that the issue might not simply be about one argument between his father and stepmother. He allegedly started to believe that there could be a much deeper problem. And then, according to the story, something happened that changed everything. King Charles allegedly requested a private meeting with his son. The meeting was supposedly arranged away from the public eye. No cameras, no journalists, no official announcement. Just a private conversation between a father and his son. According to the unverified reports, the meeting took place at Highgrove, and the claims suggest that this was not a casual family visit. The story says that Charles allegedly opened up to William about the pressure he had been experiencing. He reportedly spoke about the difficulties inside his personal life, and, according to the allegations, he admitted that things had become more complicated than William may have realized. The most dramatic part of the story claims that Charles allegedly told his son he had spent years trying to keep the peace. He had allegedly tried to avoid confrontation. He had allegedly tried to protect his marriage. And he had allegedly tried to protect the reputation of the monarchy at the same time. But according to the story, the pressure had taken a toll on him. Then came a sentence that has become one of the most talked about parts of this entire claim. The reports allege that Charles told William, "I didn't want to lose her, but I've already lost myself." Now, there is no verified evidence that King Charles actually said these words. But if the alleged conversation did happen, it would represent an extraordinary moment between a reigning monarch and his future successor. According to the story, William was deeply affected by what his father allegedly told him. And this is where the relationship between father and son supposedly became the center of the entire crisis. The claims suggest that William allegedly told Charles that he did not have to continue living under such pressure, that he was still the king, and that he deserved to feel safe and respected in his own home. But then, according to the allegations, Charles supposedly gave William permission to take action. The story claims that he allegedly told his son, "Do what you must, my son." Those words, if they were ever actually spoken, would have enormous significance, because William would no longer be acting simply as a concerned son. He would be acting as the future king of Britain, and according to the story, that was exactly what happened next. Within a short period of time, William allegedly began consulting senior advisors. Private meetings were reportedly held, documents were allegedly reviewed, and discussions supposedly began about how the situation inside the royal household should be handled. But there was one problem. William could not simply remove Queen Camilla from the monarchy. The British royal family is governed by centuries of tradition, constitutional rules, and established procedures. So, according to the claims, William allegedly began looking for another solution. Instead of confronting Camilla publicly, the alleged strategy was much quieter. Her access to certain meetings would supposedly be reduced. Her influence over some decisions would allegedly be limited. And, according to the story, the people around her would slowly begin stepping back. No dramatic announcement, no public confrontation, just a gradual shift in power. But then, according to the claims, something happened that made the situation even more serious. More people allegedly came forward, and this time, the reports claimed that their stories went back years. Suddenly, William was allegedly facing a much bigger question. Was this really one isolated incident? Or was there a pattern that had been hidden behind palace walls for a very long time? And if that pattern really existed, how far was Prince William prepared to go to protect his father? Because according to the story, the answer would soon become clear. And what happened next could potentially have changed the future of the British monarchy forever. According to the unverified claims, the situation inside the royal family was now moving into a completely different phase. What had allegedly started as a private family dispute was supposedly becoming a serious institutional crisis. And at the center of it all was Prince William. The reports claim that William had quietly begun taking steps to reduce Camilla's influence inside the royal household. But there was no dramatic confrontation, no public argument, no official announcement. Instead, the alleged change happened slowly, almost silently. According to the claims, Camilla began noticing that she was no longer being included in certain private discussions. Some meetings reportedly took place without her. Some decisions were allegedly being discussed by senior officials before she was informed. And people who had once worked closely with her supposedly started keeping their distance. If these claims were true, this would represent a very specific kind of power shift. Because inside an institution like the monarchy, power does not always disappear overnight. Sometimes it disappears one meeting at a time, one conversation at a time, one invitation at a time. And according to the story, that was exactly what was allegedly happening to Camilla. But then, the allegations became even more serious. The reports claimed that several people who had worked inside the royal household for years were now sharing stories about their experiences. Some allegedly described moments when Camilla became angry during meetings. Others reportedly claimed that she could be extremely difficult to work with when things did not go according to plan. And according to some of the allegations, there were concerns about how she reacted when William and Catherine received significant attention. Again, none of these claims have been officially confirmed. But the story continued to grow, and the more people who allegedly came forward, the more pressure was supposedly placed on the royal household. Then came another major development. According to the claims, a private meeting was allegedly arranged between senior advisors and members of the royal establishment. The purpose? To discuss what should happen next. The allegations suggest that the meeting was not about punishing Camilla. Instead, the focus was allegedly on protecting the stability of the monarchy. Because if the claims were true, there was now a difficult question facing everyone involved. How do you deal with a crisis involving the king's own family? And how do you do it without creating an even bigger crisis for the institution? According to the story, William believed that the answer was to act quietly. The reports claim that his priority was not revenge. It was stability. He allegedly wanted to protect his father, but he also wanted to protect the future of the crown. And this is where the story takes its most controversial turn. According to the unverified allegations, William's influence inside the monarchy began growing rapidly. At the same time, Camilla's public presence allegedly began to decrease. Some of her appearances were reportedly changed, some engagements were allegedly canceled, and certain responsibilities were supposedly reassigned. To the public, these changes might have looked completely normal. But according to the claims, people inside the palace understood that something much bigger was happening. Then, the story claims, another major meeting took place. This time, the alleged subject was the future role of Queen Camilla. The reports circulating online claim that discussions took place about reducing her official responsibilities. The idea, according to the allegations, was that Camilla could remain connected to the king personally, while having a much smaller public and institutional role. But there was one major problem. Any significant change to Camilla's position would immediately attract attention. The public would ask questions. The media would investigate, and the royal family would have to explain why such a dramatic change was taking place. So, according to the story, the alleged plan was to make the transition as quietly as possible. But then came the moment that supposedly changed everything. The reports claim that Camilla was allegedly informed that several of her upcoming engagements would no longer take place. She was reportedly told that some responsibilities would be reassigned. And then, according to the allegations, she began making calls to palace officials. She allegedly wanted answers. She reportedly wanted to know who had made these decisions. And most importantly, she allegedly wanted to know whether King Charles supported them. But according to the story, Charles remained publicly silent. And that silence became one of the most important parts of the entire situation. Because Camilla allegedly believed that Charles would protect her. After all, they had been together for decades. But according to the claims, Charles was now caught between two sides. On one side was the woman he had loved for many years. On the other was his son, Prince William, who was allegedly acting in what he believed was the best interest of his father and the monarchy. The situation, according to the story, had become almost impossible for Charles to control. And then came the most dramatic claim yet. The reports alleged that King Charles was considering stepping back from some of his active responsibilities. Not necessarily giving up the throne, not necessarily abdicating, but allegedly allowing Prince William to take on a much greater role in the daily operation of the monarchy. If true, this would be an extraordinary development, because it would effectively mean that the future king was beginning to take control of the institution before officially becoming king. And according to the claims, this was exactly what was being prepared behind the scenes. But there was still one final question. Would Charles actually agree to step aside? Or would he fight to protect his marriage, his position, and the woman who had stood beside him for decades? Because according to the story, the answer was about to come in the form of one decision, a decision that could change the future of the British monarchy and put Prince William in a position of power far sooner than anyone expected. According to the unverified claims, the situation had now reached a point where King Charles could no longer simply remain silent. For weeks, the alleged tension inside the royal family had reportedly continued to grow. Prince William was supposedly becoming more involved in the day-to-day affairs of the monarchy. At the same time, Queen Camilla's alleged influence was reportedly decreasing, and King Charles was now caught in the middle. But then, according to the story, came the decision that could have changed everything. The reports circulating online claim that Charles called a private meeting with some of his closest advisors. There were reportedly no cameras, no journalists, no public announcement, just a small group of people discussing the future of the monarchy. And according to the allegations, Charles arrived with a handwritten letter, a letter that allegedly contained the most difficult decision of his reign. The story claims that Charles told those around him that he was considering stepping back from his active royal responsibilities. But there was reportedly an important distinction. He would not necessarily be giving up the throne. He would remain king. But Prince William would allegedly take over much of the day-to-day operation of the monarchy. If this claim were true, it would represent an extraordinary change, because it would mean that William could effectively become the main working figure of the crown while his father remained king. However, there is currently no official confirmation that such a decision ever took place. Still, according to the allegations, the plan was already being discussed privately. And then came another shocking claim. The report suggested that Charles had allegedly reached a point where he believed he had only two choices. He could continue fighting against the growing crisis, or he could step back and allow the next generation to take greater control. According to the story, Charles allegedly chose the second option. The announcement, if it had actually happened as described, would have sent shockwaves across Britain and around the world. The public would suddenly be faced with a completely new royal reality. William would become the central figure of the monarchy. Catherine would reportedly take on a larger role, and Charles would move into a much quieter position. But the biggest question would still remain: what would happen to Queen Camilla? According to the unverified claims, Camilla would no longer have the same level of public influence. Some of her responsibilities would allegedly be reassigned. Her public appearances would reportedly become less frequent, and the royal household would supposedly begin focusing much more heavily on William and Catherine. The story even claims that the monarchy's official digital presence would be reorganized. Photographs and profiles of William and Catherine would allegedly become more prominent, while Charles would supposedly appear in a much smaller role. But once again, these claims have not been independently verified. And this is where we need to separate speculation from fact. There is no confirmed evidence that Prince William removed Queen Camilla's royal influence in the way described by these reports. There is also no verified evidence that King Charles secretly handed over control of the monarchy to William because of a private dispute. So, for now, this remains an extraordinary story built around allegations that have circulated online. But there is one final moment that has fueled even more speculation. According to the claims, after the alleged transition, Prince William appeared in a major television interview. During the conversation, the subject of his father's personal life reportedly came up, and William allegedly made a simple comment. He suggested that his father seemed happier and more comfortable having his own space. On the surface, it sounded like an ordinary observation. But royal watchers immediately began analyzing every word, every pause, every expression, every movement. Some commentators believed the statement was simply about Charles having more personal time. Others saw something much deeper. They wondered whether William was indirectly referring to the alleged problems between Charles and Camilla. And that is where this entire story ends, with a question rather than an answer. Was this really the hidden story behind the scenes of the British monarchy? Was Prince William truly forced to step in to protect his father? Did a private family dispute really grow into a major institutional crisis? Or is this simply another dramatic royal rumor that became bigger and bigger as it spread across the internet? At this moment, there is no official evidence confirming the extraordinary chain of events described in these reports. But one thing is certain: the British royal family has always been surrounded by intense public interest, speculation, and rumors. And whenever the king, the future king, and the queen are at the center of a story like this, the world is going to pay attention. So, until credible evidence or an official statement emerges, these claims should be treated with caution. Because behind the palace walls, the truth may be very different from the story being told online. And perhaps the biggest question is not what happened in the past, but what happens next. Because if the British monarchy really is entering a new era of power and leadership, the world may soon discover that the biggest royal story of all hasn't even happened yet.